Since March 2020, in 1933 came the Enabling Act in the Third Reich, also in March, and under a pretext, the openly corrupt regime here in Germany illegally suspended the basic law for an indefinite period.
Do you know what you wanna do? Life is running out.
The pretext 2020 is a laboratory pandemic under the direction of corrupt institutes like the RKI and their bought quacks and snake oil salesmen.
Maybe we shouldn't call the vaccine the final solution.
Mr. Time has come to you. Oh.
With deliberately falsified numbers and statistics and misinformation from the also corrupt media.
Oh, you never ask it why.
And as in the Third Reich or later in the GDR, an informer and police state was established overnight.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're in heaven or in hell.
And for the people who suffer from lack of oxygen due to excessive wearing the face diaper on the street, in the car or in the shower, and cannot follow thanks to the resulting brain rot, illegally because there was and is no pandemic. And everyone knows that by now. The definition was simply 2009 changed in time for the purpose of abuse, in example for the swine flu scam. Also orchestrated with Drosten as swine flu priest. Among other things, the effects and severity of an epidemic were changed in terms of a number of infections and mortality, so that everything can now be called a pandemic without the many annoying real deaths that would need to be proven. And no, 9,300 probably flu victims in over 8 months who are deliberately falsely declared as COVID-19 deaths. There is no real test until today, but only non-validated PCR tests, which even according to the inventor himself are not suitable for COVID-19 detection, are not a large death number, with over 80 million people. There are usually many more without it ever being discussed. In 2017 alone there were 25,000, so almost double the number in the same period. We already have had a dictatorship creeping in disguise of a democracy here before. And it is also nothing new in literature and movies either. Back then, by the way, there were also real consequences if someone granted himself.
Gefängnis? Zuchthaus?
But that didn't stop people from standing up and showing their faces.
Bloß nichts. Es gibt nichts zu gestehen.
Geben Sie doch endlich zu, dass Sie mit Ihrem Bruder zusammen die Flugblätter hergestellt und verteilt haben.
Ja. Und ich bin stolz darauf.
And not cowardly or even masked hiding with the other sheep. The new fancy foreign word, which many apparently only know from science fiction fantasy, is called, by the way, civil courage. Yeah, crazy, I know. I've never heard it either. Somebody must have invented it from scratch and put a copyright on it, because hardly anyone dares to use it. While the first COVID-1984 videos described kind of the current situation, now it's about possible resulting scenarios, which were also partially foreseen in literature and movies.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're in heaven or in hell.
People accept their role as masked slaves of the ruling class, who only have our best in mind, try to get like a good dog before each action the permission of their new masters, and let themselves, in order to be allowed to use mask-free their toilet, every 2 weeks tested and vaccinated, aka getting a stick rammed through their nose into their brain and genetically manipulated. This, in quotation marks, natural development would then be a combination of reverse evolution and technical progress. A relatively peaceful Brave New World variation would be, for example, surrogates. The totalitarian regime is not impressed by the millions of peaceful protests that have taken place so far and continues to torture and kill through the unjustified inhuman emergency laws defenseless children and elderly. Further increases the pressure on the population for no apparent reason, at some point only to enforce by military on the streets and concentration camps for healthy people who simply cannot be talked ill. So still 1984 combined with civil war and uprisings, for example as in V for Vendetta. It is all just a simulation. In March 1999, March again? Probably a mistake in the Matrix. Appears Larry and Andy's Today After Sex Change, Lana and Lily Wachowski's US-Australian sci-fi dystopia. Matrix, noun female, has a Latin origin and at that time meant something like mother animal. Later, with more meanings, I always understood it to be a kind of grid similar to the pattern of dots in rows and columns as described here in trustworthy German. Long before the Matrix movie, there were others who used the term in a very similar way. In 1976, The Deadly Assassin was released as the third Doctor Who episode in the 14th season with the fourth Doctor, Tom Baker. This is also the first time the Doctor is without a companion. In the episode, the Doctor has a precognitive vision of the assassination of the Time Lord President. When he unsuccessfully tries to prevent it and is even accused of being the perpetrator, he is able to gain time, and in course of the investigation he realizes that it was his arch-enemy, the Master, who had sent him the premonition of the assassination attempt by a supercomputer called the Matrix, a huge electronic neural network that can transform thought patterns into virtual reality.
We are so young, our lives have just begun, but already we are considering escape from this world.
In 1997, Alejandro Anemabar's brilliant Spanish thriller Open Your Eyes was a true eye-opener, which German title Virtual Nightmare is once again a prime example of lazy, incompetent marketing, as it spoils unnecessarily the entire plot. A rich masked playboy in custody for murder tells a shrink the events. One evening he met his dream girl, but his jealous ex caused a serious car accident in which his face got disfigured. After a face reconstruction was a success, everything seemed normal again, but slowly reality and fantasy start to mix together. The movie was a great success with critics and audiences. In 2001 it got an entertainingly solid yet completely unnecessary Hollywood remake with the same plot, also financially successful, but with reasonable mixed reviews.
And we've waited for so long for this moment to come. We're so anxious to be together in there.
Which in my opinion, thanks to a weaker cast and simpler, more emotionally focused story, can't even for a second keep up with the disturbingly sinister original. 1998, a dark city appeared nameless on screens, without a past or future, in which the protagonist is on the run because of murders he can't remember. While he desperately tries to escape his telekinetic hunters, and with the help of a well-intentioned doctor is slowly being equipped with telekinetic powers as well, he slowly uncovers the secret of the city. Strangers who use corpses as hosts manipulate everyone's memories and constantly change the cityscape. They belong to a dying alien race and try to get behind the secret of the human soul, since they think it's their only hope to survive. The Crow director Alex Proyas' US-Australian neo-noir science fiction has clear allusions to German expressionism like Metropolis, Nosferatu, or The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. But also Brazil and Hellraiser. He barely made his $27 million budget back and was undeservedly a flop. From my point of view, thanks to wrong marketing as a horror movie and because of the god-awful cinema cut. Among other things with dummy voice-over at the beginning, which unnecessarily spoils the exciting, highly complex, mysterious story. This was fixed in the highly recommendable director's cut from 2008, which adds 12 minutes to the runtime, better effects and more character development. Also a slightly different structure by different editing and rearranging of some scenes. Probably the first and only example where I recommend the new version, since it's basically the original version that was deliberately destroyed by the studio back then. Some of the sets were later reused in the thematically similar Matrix. 1999, almost the cinema year of existentialism. I suppose also because of the millennium turn on the horizon.
So
several movies appeared next to Matrix, which were also existence and virtual reality themed. In David Cronenberg's ingenious but unfortunately financially unsuccessful science fiction thriller Existence, a game designer invents a game that has to be loaded directly into the human nerve system. After an attack, she flees together with a bodyguard and begins to test her new game that got damaged. From this point on, it becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish between game or reality, even more since they are playing in the game a similar game based on similar principles.
This world is a cruel place and we're here only to lose. So before life tears us apart, let death bless me with you. Oh,
In 1983, Cronenberg's cult classic Videodrome was already virtual reality themed. In which the increasing loss of reality of a private TV channel operator is shown after he was repeatedly exposed to the gory pornographic broadcasts of a pirate station. The basic premise of an AI which leads to the revolt and takeover of machines is reminiscent of the Terminator, already reviewed in the same named retrospectives. The idea with the computer-simulated world obviously came from Daniel F. Galloway's 1964 US novel Simulacron 3, aka Counterfire World. Rainer Werner Fassbinder's 1973 German TV movie World on a Wire is excellent but not 100% similar. The novel is about the operator of a large city simulated to the smallest detail with thousands of people, which is used for market research purposes. In the movie, it is the new director whose predecessor died under unexplained circumstances.
this life, it ain't worth living.
The simulation is so good that the inhabitants have their own consciousness and do not even realize that they are only part of a program. During the story, the protagonist realizes more and more that his world is not real either.
This life ain't worth living.
This happens in the book with the help of an admin who has descended from her higher reality. A relationship also develops between the two. At some point in the movie, he seeks the so-called contact person, which only reveals herself it's his love interest at the very end, during he gets confused for a killer and chased. He succeeds in saving his own simulated world from destruction, and by exchanging bodies with an admin who looks like his twin, he's able to switch to the higher reality. In the movie, this happens after he got shot by the police. In the novel, his old body is destroyed during an uprising of the people. With Josef Rusnak's German-US sleeping pill, The 13th Floor, another Simulacron 3 adaptation appeared. But from my point of view, it should have better stayed hidden. Programmer Fuller developed a lifelike 1937 LA simulation running in the 13th floor of a company. When he gets murdered, his assistant Hall becomes a suspect, since he can't remember what happened. Thanks to Fuller's alleged daughter Jane, which turns out to be from the higher reality, and during his research in the virtual city, he discovers that Jane's husband used Hall to kill Fuller before he was able to tell him that his world is just an illusion too. When he tries to kill Jane, he gets shot and replaced by Hall in his reality, which is apparently also just a simulation. One of the main reasons why I even watched the Snorfest back then, some scenes were in the music video Join Me from him, but the song is only in the end credits and of course had nothing to do with the score. Even today, still a common practice to false tease the audience. The 13th Floor, an allusion to the unlucky number, which is sometimes due to superstition information skipped when it comes to hotel rooms, floors and so on. But here annoying smart SOE to fake intelligence as typical for a Roland Emmerich production is a bitter disappointment and fails despite decent cast and effects on every level. First and foremost, thanks to an amateurish staging which never exceeds TV levels, uninteresting dialogues and changes to the original to fail to create mystery. For example, by the senseless green disco spotlights with fog machine in the for reasons darkened laboratory. Hectic farce and meaningless statements of the programmer who talks about ominous dangers and time limits just pulled out of a hat. He and Hall are also constantly acting surprised and seem to have no clue what is going on in this simulation, but they are supposedly working for 6 years on the project and have even doppelgangers in there. Both of them jump every time kind of blind into it. How exactly do they want to get results if they can't even monitor what is going on? Appearing in supposedly embarrassing in Emmerich German funny situations, behave like total morons, one of them even lets himself directly get run over by a car, and so on. In the book, real and simulated worlds play in the 1960s, in World on a Wire in the 70s, and the simulation serves the company for market research. The movie, on the other hand, is set in 1999 or 2024, and the simulation, God knows why, in 1937. They probably still had 1930s props lying around from another production. I have no idea. The simulation also doesn't seem to serve any concrete purpose except Fuller's wishes, and this is boring as hell and I couldn't care less. The movie made with a $60 million budget only 18 million back worldwide, and was quite rightly a box office flop.
Somebody gonna unplug me now?
What the hell?
One day, Neo is led to Morpheus by hacker colleague Trinity, who tells him that he is the chosen one and future destroyer of the Matrix, an artificial environment created by machines, in which almost all people unconsciously live. After a revolt of machines led by an artificial intelligence, they now breed humans in huge farms to use them as energy sources, since the sun is hidden behind clouds thanks to a nuclear winter. Morpheus and his crew are hovercrafting through the devastated landscape, constantly in search of the chosen one prophesied by an oracle. The Matrix is monitored by so-called agents, extremely fast, basically invincible programs disguised as humans. The Matrix is overpacked with philosophical approaches, presented in a mix of science fiction, action and kung fu, or wire-fu. Meant are the wires which the actors are attached to during they seem to fly. More about the beginnings of wire work can already be seen in the Chinese Ghost Story retrospective. The best known elements of Matrix are undoubtedly bullet time, a special slow-motion photography where the camera rotates around a hovering object, and the red pill, which in contrast to the blue pill wakes people up so they are able to see the truth. The movie is, despite some logic holes, people as batteries for machines, even ordinary batteries would be more efficient. Compared to the usual Hollywood crap, still very intelligent and entertaining, at least the first one. Part 2 and 3, also by the Wachowskis, are stupid as fuck but still entertaining. The cult movie had a moderate budget of $63 million and could make it worldwide almost 8 times back. He received, as his financially similar successful continuation, mostly positive reviews. Like in Star Wars, the inspiration came from many movies, ideas and books. For example, the opening credits resemble those of the Japanese cyberpunk movie Ghost in the Shell from 1995. The White Rabbit made a visit from Alice in Wonderland. The philosophic theological aspects are borrowed from cognitive science, for example Plato's allegory of the cave, religion from Buddhism to the New Testament, but also nihilism, counter, underground or subculture, and so on. Many people could be awakened from the Matrix by Neo and his team, and live now in the last sanctuary hidden deep inside the Earth, facing a great machine attack. While the people try to fend it off, Neo's team accomplishes inside the Matrix some illogical tests pulled out of a hat. Mainly as padding to sneak the runtime inconspicuously over the 2-hour mark. In addition, Agent Smith, who is no longer part of the Matrix, now has the ability to endlessly reproduce. He also somehow manages to possess a human. Because why not? Matrix Rehashed had costs of $150 million and made over $700 million. But even back then, he kind of failed to connect with his audience, since the story doesn't really innovate or is at least interesting, but continues in a rather silly, repetitive and unnecessarily complicated way. Neo beating up chanceless agents and flying around as Super Neo, underground rave party, pseudo-religious bubble, new uninteresting characters with even less interesting relationship hackmack and exciting politic talk, just like in the prequels, were no help either. Or that the action scenes and unusual effects from part 1 were actually only imitated, varied and endlessly stretched out. And instead of answering questions, many new questions came up. What the fuck? Since when can you do that? I thought that only worked in the Matrix. Whatever. Parts 2 and 3 were released in May and September 2003. In between, the US-Japanese Animatrix by different directors came direct to video. The Wachowskis produced and only wrote the first 4 of the 9 animated shorts, which describe, in my opinion quite entertaining, the background story of the Matrix universe. While everyone prepares for the defensive fight against the robot invasion, Neo can, however, and for whatever reason, be freed from a coma aka captivity by apparently emotional computer programs with not really comprehensible motivations. Neo can defeat human Smith from the last part but gets blinded and flies with Trinity to the center of the Machine City, since Agent Smith now also poses a threat to the Machine Empire. It comes to the final battle between Smith and Neo, which Neo wins by losing it? Whatever. As long as this thing is finally over. Fuck. Matrix Revolutions wannabe fell far short of expectations in every aspect, and with the same budget as part 2 could not even make as much as part 1. The story goes completely off the rails and doesn't even try to make sense anymore. The wisdom obviously came directly from fortune cookies, and some of the effects similar to the plot seem just hastily slapped together. The many CGI scenes just look fake as fuck, and he quite rightly neither went well with audiences nor critics. He is not a worthy conclusion, but the proof that part 1 was just an entertaining lucky coincidence open to all kinds of interpretations, in which everyone, even the Wachowskis themselves, come up with a new meaning just when it fits their current narrative.